For more on what this week's results could mean for Canadians, I'm joined by Tom Mulcair, CTV News political commentator and former federal NDP leader. Tom, good to have you here as always.
Good to be with you, Renee.
So a lot of people here looking south of the border, some a little bit nervous about what is going to be happening this week, especially when it comes to Canada's trade relationship with the U.S., which could be altered depending on the outcome of this election. Trump, of course, with his big tariff plan. What is your view on how things could change depending on who wins?
Well, I think you set that up perfectly, because I know of no country in the world that pays more attention to the elections in another country than Canadians do with American elections. It's just that our history, our geography, and of course, as your main question puts it, our economies are so intertwined. I do think that if Trump gets in, he will follow through on his promise to increase tariffs radically. Now, don't try to convince Donald Trump that those tariffs are ultimately paid for by American consumers. He just thinks that it's money in the pot for the U.S. government. So he would be looking to impose tariffs, and Canada would probably not get much of an exception, even though going back to the 60s and 70s, we had an auto pact with the U.S. where we understood that our economies were that closely related. We had to have certain deals that didn't even exist in other countries at the time. Now we've got an overarching free trade deal negotiated the last time. Trump says he's going to renegotiate it again. What form would that take? So yeah, any Canadian company, any community, frankly, Renee, with a large manufacturing concern has to be very worried about what could happen in this election. The other worry, of course, is watching our close neighbor, our American cousins, with a candidate for the presidency who, again, using very coded wording, is essentially calling for violence, saying that if he loses, it's because the other side cheated. It's unique, and he's got a lot of supporters, and it's worth remembering that there are more guns in the United States than there are citizens. And yeah, it's a real concern what that could actually turn into. I certainly hope it doesn't wind up violent, but it did the last time Trump lost and refused to admit it.
Right. Should something like, I'm thinking about January 6th, should something like that happen, say, should Trump lose, could we be affected here in Canada?
Absolutely. And we don't want to think of that sort of doomsday scenario. And there are people doing fiction around that already. Let's let them do that. But in the real world, the world of Donald Trump, the world where he lost an election 4 years ago, gave a speech to incite people, and who went and broke, it's almost as if it was a fiction, but they broke into the United States Capitol. There were people who died from this thing, and Trump is, again, a candidate, which in and of itself is amazing. And he's using the same type of rhetoric this time, almost front-loading his excuses, saying basically that he can't lose an election. And if ever the numbers show that he did, it's because the other side was cheating in the vote count. So yeah, it's a real source of concern. No question about that, Renee.
Now, to another topic, defense and security, strong priorities for the U.S. What about demands for Canada to meet its NATO spending obligation of 2% of GDP? We know where Canada stands. It's not going to happen this year. Maybe by 2032, I think, is the year. So will more pressure mount on this issue for Canada?
Absolutely. If Trump gets in, don't expect this type of Trudeau deadline, which is in the mid-1930s, as you were pointing out, to be able to hold. And it's not that anybody is imposing anything on us, Renee. We agreed to that. And it was supposed to be by this year that 2% of our gross domestic product was to have been spent on defense. Up until last summer, we were the only country in NATO, and we're a founding member of NATO. We were the only country in NATO that didn't even have a plan to meet those targets. Now, we say that we have a plan, but we're kicking it so far down the road, it's absolutely meaningless. And whether it's the American senior diplomats or Canadian government observers, they're all saying the same thing, that this is malarkey. It's just Trudeau trying to buy some time. He's not going to be able to buy time. He's going to have to buy armaments. This is a tough world that we're living in. Just look at what China's threatening on Taiwan. Look what Russia did in its illegal invasion of Ukraine. There are lots of places in the world where the strength of NATO has to be present and maintained. And Canada has been a laggard. There's no question about that.
All right. That is our time. We will have to leave it there. Tom, good to see you. Thanks for being here.
All the best, Renee.